and welcome to today's Books Alive online event with Jonathan King, author of the Inkberg Enigma, and Alexia from the Hutt City Library. We'd like to thank the New Zealand Libraries Partnership Program for the opportunity to host these events this week and next. Jonathan and Alexia, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Hello. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, kia ora koutou katoa. So my name is Alexia, and I'm the Children's and Teen Services Librarian for Hutt City Libraries. Our Books Alive event today is with Jonathan King, who is the author and illustrator of the Inkberg Enigma, which is this book here, which is nominated for 2 awards in the New Zealand Children and Young Adult Book Awards this year, which is the Wright Family Foundation Esther Glenn Award for Junior Fiction and the Best First Book Award. Now, Jonathan isn't a newcomer to the comic genre, but the Inkberg Enigma is his first full-length graphic novel for children. He's also really well known as a writer and director of films. And I'm sure all of you guys have seen Black Sheep, which is an amazing film, one of my favourites. And the questions we'll be asking today have been sourced from all the Tamariki and Rangatahi of Wainuiomata and their whānau. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here. I hope too many people haven't seen Black Sheep because it's an R13, so you shouldn't have seen it if you're not 13. But.
That's true. Maybe your family have talked about it. So we'll start off today with a general question of how did you come up with this idea, the idea for this book?
Gosh, that is a good question. I think I knew the kind of book that I wanted to write, and so I very much wanted to do the sort of exciting adventure that the kind of adventure stories that I loved when I was young, of which Tintin comics were a really big part of that. But then also, prose books as well, which were kind of about young people getting into exciting and mysterious adventures in their own world, really. So they're stories about people who you don't have to travel to, didn't want it to be like traveling to far off lands. And stories about traveling to far off lands are kind of less appropriate these days, I think. But I wanted it to be about finding adventure in the world that you live in, and that's and as a kid when I read stories like that, I always hoped that there were adventures within the world that I lived in. So I wanted to make that kind of story, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about the place that the story might happen, and then making up the things that might happen in the place. So it took a while, a long time, thinking about places to put in it, and then the kinds of things that I wanted to put in the story.
Yeah, which kind of leads us on to our second question really well. So you've already mentioned Tintin, but what other graphic novels and comics influenced you the most?
Story-wise, certainly Tintin, and stories like, Under the Mountain was a story that I read, which I really loved when I was a kid, and I ended up making a film about that, a new adaptation of that. And that's, that's exactly that thing. Kids that live in Auckland, where I lived when I was 9 or 10, and looking around the actual town that you live in, and creepy and amazing things happen. And then things like Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Jules Verne's story about digging down where you live and finding things there. And then slightly more fantastic things. Maybe there's a book called The Phantom Tollbooth. I don't know if any of you know that, which is a really great, strange kind of a magical adventure. And Emil and the Detectives was one that I talked to the publisher about that was kind of plucky kids getting into adventures. And there's a series called The Three Investigators, which is a team of kid investigators solve mysteries. So things like that, really, where kids get into cool stuff and kind of solve it with their own ingenuity and excitement and things.
Yeah.
And then in terms of comics, Tintin was a huge influence. I'm sure you can tell by the look of my comic. And then what else? I liked superhero comics when I was young, but I totally haven't kept up with them anymore. And most superhero comics don't even feel like they're for kids anymore. They feel like they're for middle-aged men collecting them. But there's a comic artist called Darwin Cook, who's an American, who did a did a really great kind of Justice League story, which I really like. And Dylan Horrocks, who's someone from Wellington, who I really like his work, and he's a really lovely person too, and really encouraging to people who make comics. And there's a guy called Yves Chaland, who was a French cartoonist who died quite young, but whose work I really like too. And all of those people actually are quite influenced by the sort of Tintin style, or the clear line style as it's known. So that's definitely the main influence in my comic making, I think.
Awesome. So did you always want to be an author/illustrator?
Kind of, yeah, that or a filmmaker, really. So yeah, they were both things that I loved. I loved making comics all the time when I was a kid, and reading comics and making comics. And then when I'd sort of finished school, I thought I'd better get a real job, and I sort of started working in publishing and doing kind of design, book design and magazine design and things. But then thought I'd have a go at being a filmmaker, and so I spent a long time writing scripts, learning how to write scripts and learning how to make films, and started making stuff. I started making music videos and then making films. And then, I mean, I'd made a few films, but films are so expensive to make and it takes so long to raise money to make films that I was kind of dying to connect back to how can I keep telling stories without spending 3 years raising millions of dollars just to do something. So yeah, probably about 10 years ago, I started drawing comics again and really, really loving it, just as a way of telling stories and getting things out there. And because there's so much money involved in films, you've got so many other people who are telling you what you can and can't do with the money or in your story. And with comics, there are kind of no rules, really. You can do whatever you want. And that's what's really exciting about them for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So what was your process in writing this book? So right from the start, from conception. Yeah. With my shorter comics, I kind of had no process. I just kind of dreamed up ideas and then started drawing them when they were quite short. And then you can kind of do that with a short story, which is what's really cool about it. It was harder with a big story, and I spent a bit of time. I probably started drawing too early, in fact. So I started drawing pages and kind of getting it down before I had a good idea of exactly how it was going to play out. So my process was sort of start drawing and write as I draw pages. In retrospect, that was a slightly bad idea because it used up a lot of time. And if you wanted to rewrite, you've actually got to redraw a lot of pages. So I should have spent more time just writing the words before I started drawing. Yeah, so that was, and so for me, this, like you said, this is the first book I've done. This is the longest thing I'd done before this was maybe 12 pages or something. So 128 pages book was 10 times bigger than anything I'd done before. And so I was learning how to write a long comic, how to write and draw a big comic as I went. And I did learn that it was harder than I thought it was going to be, just because of those scale things and making the whole thing work as a whole thing. Yeah. And did you have any visuals you'd like to show us about the progress?
I do, actually, yeah. Funny, you should mention that. So I will, if I can share the screen, and I'll go to there. And I'll go full screen on there. Can you see all that?
Yeah.
So this was some stuff that I did. This was actually after I had I'd drawn quite a few pages, and I thought, hang on, I've got to go back again and just drill into my characters a little bit more. So this was stuff of just finding more about my characters, how I knew they were going to play in the story, but in still quite a loose way. So it wasn't finished pages. It was just quite loose stuff, but what might some of their things be and how might they play in the story? And so if you've read the book, you can see that kind of the characters are here. But there are some things which have changed a bit. And so Miro, who's one of the kids in the story, I had this idea that he'd collect all kinds of things, like a bit of a kind of hoarder, collector, and kept a kind of journal of the things that he was going to keep. And then the journal thing, I kind of honed in on. I thought, oh, that's cool. Okay. And that actually became a thing which is in the story, quite an important prop in the story. And so this collecting thing, the obsessive collecting thing, turned into books, which is something which I can totally relate to in my life. Obsessively collecting books and even buying ones you've already got, but it's got a different cover and things like that. So I definitely got that out of my own life, and yeah, so that sort of helped find my way to the story I was going to actually tell in the end. And then something else I did was quite a lot of sort of looking for locations and images of what was going to be in the story. So some of these, well, actually all of these are places I've been to, even though I didn't create all of these pictures. But on the left-hand side is Littleton, just out of Christchurch, which is the town in the story is quite heavily based on that. And the stuff on the right-hand side is a place in California, in America, called Cannery Row, which I have been to and is a place I really love as well. And so that kind of old factory thing I got into my story as well. So I did quite a bit of stuff like that, looking for places and looking for images of what I wanted to get into the story. Yeah.
Cool. And how did you go about so one of my colleagues who's an illustrator was saying that there's a lot of similarities between movie storyboarding and comic books. Do you find that there's a real correlation between those two?
Yes, there is to some extent. And I can show you some of those too, actually. So I had always, let me open that up again. I had always storyboarded my films myself. So this is some pictures here from a film storyboard from Under the Mountain, actually. And you can see they're not quite as finished or as polished as comic pages, but quite useful for working out things in a film shoot. And especially this was a sequence which has got sort of visual effects in it, and it's got some stunts in it. So it's quite good for the filmmaker to be able to talk about, right, this one's going to be an effect shot, this one's going to be a stunt person, this one's going to be something else, this one might be in the studio and not actually moving. So I had done quite a bit of that, and that's telling stories with pictures, but I guess putting pictures together to help tell stories. And you've got words, so films have audible words, and comics have drawn words too. So there probably is quite a lot of similarity, really, to some extent. Yeah, not all film storyboards are as comic-y probably as the ones I do too. Yeah, but it was, I guess, it was a sort of way into it for me, definitely.
Awesome. So I saw in the back of the book that you use a iPad Pro.
Yeah.
Illustrations for this one. Have you always drawn digitally, or is it kind of a mixture of both?
I hadn't always. So even these storyboards are done in pencil, and so when I started drawing more comics, I started to draw them digitally. And originally I had a thing called a Cintiq, which is it's actually a big screen with a stylus on it. And so you're looking into the screen. And I was about halfway through the book and I could feel my eyeballs starting to burn. And I kind of got worried that I was looking into this great big screen all day. And that was about when the iPads came out. So I kind of switched to an iPad about half or 2/3 of the way through the book. So have I got, I think, some of the stuff here. So I use a program called Clip Studio Paint on the iPad. And this is kind of what the screen looks like on the iPad. So there's the page that you're working on, and on the left-hand side, there are the different brushes. So I've got to say, I actually kind of really love drawing digitally. I mean, what's great about comics is you can just do it with a pencil and a paper and a ballpoint pen, and you don't need fancy equipment. And so I would certainly say to anyone who wants to start drawing comics, which is what I did. When I started drawing comics, I just drew them with pencil on kind of bit of card. And so draw pencil and then ink it with an ink pen. And then I'd actually scan them, probably maybe color them digitally after that. But you can ink it, and you can maybe photocopy the inked pages and then color them with colored pencils or felt pens or whatever. So the process is kind of the same digitally, just that it always exists digitally and never actually on paper until you print it. But so you've got different brushes. So you're still using a stylus, but you can have fatter brushes or thin brushes or ink brushes, black ink brushes, or painting with colors. And so you can see on the left-hand side, there are the different brushes, which I've given different names. So I've made up the names for them because they remind me of different things that I want them to be. And you can choose different sizes and then what color it's going to be. And on the right-hand side, you can see the different layers. And what's also quite good about drawing digitally is you can draw layers of things. And so you can have pencil layers and ink layers. But then also perhaps the people are on one layer and the background are on different layers as well. It just helps you kind of order things. And you can turn different layers off as well to help you concentrate on what you're drawing. So I'll just see. So this is another example of page. So this is sort of my roughest pencils. They're called pencils, but it's digital too, but they're in light blue. And then I might fine tune the pencils a little bit. And you can see some of the layout changes a little bit. Oops. As you go. And then I will ink it. The black lines. So if this was on paper, you would ink it and then you would rub out all of the pencils. But with layers, I can just turn off the pencil layer. And then I can add the words, which is another quite good thing about doing digitally. You can type the words in. I've got quite messy handwriting, so I'm not very good at lettering. Some people are much better at lettering, but I do use a font which looks like hand lettering because my hand lettering is terrible. And then your colors, and so you can drop in quite flat colors and then start to fine tune those and sort of paint on skies and stuff like that. Too, yeah. So that's kind of how I make pages for mine.
Wonderful. Now I've got a really tricky question now.
Yes.
One of our younger Tamariki. How did you become a good artist?
Well, what's really great about comics is kind of anyone can do it, and there's no right style or wrong style. And what's fantastic about comics is there's room for anything. Whatever you do, that's your style, and you can bet that there's somebody else in the world who likes that style and who wishes they could draw like that. And so whatever you start doing is your style, and then you might think of things that you would like to do better, and you might practice that. And so I had a style in mind that I kind of wanted to do, which was this very kind of clear style. And so I just started doing it and I started practicing it really. And literally, there are things like perspective. I wish I knew more. How does perspective work? And if you look at these kind of lines behind me that tell you, that the perspectives all kind of lining up, I sort of read books and I practiced looking and drawing at some of that stuff and practice perspective things. And how do you draw hands? Hands are actually really hard to draw. And sometimes you just spend a day drawing hands, and even like get a magazine or you look online and you can just draw all of the hands that you can see in a magazine or something. And just kind of practicing things like that. But it's the really important thing, I think, is that you're just setting your own goals about what you want for your style. And that was what I did. And you can't, whoever you are on planet Earth, there's, any artist probably thinks, I wish I could do horses like they can or whatever, no one can draw everything. And just, you just got to have your own vision of what you'd like to be drawing and slowly practice on the bits that go together to do that. And you can draw a bit until you're happy with it and look at the picture and what do I want to change and what do I want to keep. And that will evolve, and you've got to just finish that thing and move on from there. And the other really important thing about style is that, like, I've got this kind of style working, but I wish I could draw much more loosely. This style's quite uptight and clear and careful, and I kind of wish I wish I could draw more loosely and maybe move faster. And I really envy people who have a much looser style, and it's maybe the perspective might not be correct, or they might not be able to draw hands like I do, but they've got perhaps a much livelier or looser kind of style and stuff. So you get good at drawing. Good at drawing is subjective anyway, but you can get good at doing the things you would like to do. And you do that by practicing really too. So I was quite old. I was relatively old when I started drawing comics. And I went to life drawing, which is a thing you can do. Go and draw people or draw things. Go out into the world and draw things and just practice that. And so sketchbooks are really good for that. Just keep a book of things you'd like to draw and just practice drawing. And practice drawing the things you'd like to draw and practice improving the bits that you'd like to practice. And you don't have to show anyone too. Like a sketchbook can be your place to keep doing stuff. And maybe by the time you get to the end of the book, it's like, wow, look how much better I am at drawing the things that I wanted from the beginning. But practice, and concentrate on the bits that you'd like to concentrate on, I think is the answer.
I think that's a brilliant answer. So another question, what did you find more challenging, making a movie or making this book?
That's a really great question. What's good about making a movie is that you've got other people to help you. So you say, hey, I'd really like a beautiful picture of that, and someone will go and take you a beautiful picture of that. Or I'd really like a car to come around the corner and do that, and that will happen. With a comic, you've got to draw every single bit of it yourself, which is hard. In some ways, it's harder. The good thing is, to ask all those people to do that in a movie costs a lot of money. And for every day of shooting, you probably spend 20 days of trying to get people to planning what you're going to shoot and trying to get money to do it and organizing it and getting all the bits there. And a day of drawing, you just sit down and you start drawing. And so that's what's better about making comics. You don't need permission. You don't need funding for it. You just kind of go for it, really. And then what's hard about a longer comic? I mean, what's cool about comics is you can just start it. You can do a 1-page comic and you just did, hey, I made a comic. Or you make a 4-page comic. You can copy it and you give it to your friends or you give it to your family or post it online if you've got Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And then a longer one is a bigger job to just keep doing it. I feel like I've got off track of the question, but there are different aspects about them. And so in some ways I'm telling similar kinds of stories, but they're actually quite different to tell. And because they end up being slightly different stories too. So one is, in comics is easier to start doing than films is. But comics, you've got to do it all yourself.
Yep. So it kind of leads on to this one. Did you have the idea of maybe making this into a movie in the future?
That's a great question. Initially, not at all. I did not at all. I was definitely just doing it to be a comic book. And even when I was halfway through, I didn't think for a second, or I thought, oh, no, I can't see this as being a film, or I wouldn't want to do that. When I got to the end, I thought, oh, okay, this actually could be a film. But I think because I really love this and I'm so pleased with this and so proud of it, that I wouldn't. That's one of the things about making films is like when you're trying to raise the money and people are like, oh, well, maybe you should do this, or this could happen, or you lose that character, change that to that, and we'll give you the money if you do that, and maybe it's not a boy and a girl, maybe it's 3 boys or whatever, and people just say that to you, this thing you've been working on for ages. And so I wouldn't want to go through that with this. I don't want to make it into a film so badly that I would let people mess around with it or push me and bully me into changing it. If someone said, here's a whole lot of money, go and make a film, I'd go, cool, I'd do that. Yeah. But I wouldn't subject this to the things that often have to happen to stories to turn them into films. I wouldn't want to turn it into something else just to make it into a film.
Yep.
But if I was allowed to make whatever I wanted to, I totally would.
Well, is there a sequel in the works as well?
That's another thing. Like in the middle of it, it's like, oh my God, I'm never doing this ever again. And now that I've made it and now that's kind of out into the world, I have been thinking a little bit about a sequel. So yeah, I love the world and I love the characters and I'd love to keep thinking about the story. But it would take a while because it takes a long time to draw a book. So
how long did this one take you?
It took like 3 years.
Wow, yeah.
So anyone who's reading it now and enjoying it, looking out for the sequel might be too old by the time the sequel comes out. But
I don't think so. I enjoyed it myself.
Good. Oh, thank you.
Okay, so if you weren't a writer, director, illustrator, what would you want to do?
I don't know. I think it would always be something like that, and I'd work out a way to keep either telling stories or helping people tell stories. So I have a day job at the moment, which is I'm teaching at Massey University in Wellington. So I'm teaching filmmaking and storytelling and game making. So yeah, I'm going to probably make games actually if I'm allowed to have that as an option. That's a really interesting place, which I there's really exciting things happening, and it's so hard to make money making films, to find money to make films, and comics take a long time. But I love how you can, the same creative imagination stuff that goes into making games, and those tools again are kind of more available to people than ever before. So that's, if I'm allowed to choose that's what my thing would be. So same stuff really, making up cool stuff and making up imaginary worlds or making up cool things beneath real worlds.
Yeah. Okay, we're on to our last couple of questions. And these are kind of here to kind of help kids who are looking at you as kind of inspiration. So the first one, can you tell us a little bit about the process of getting published and how you got this book published?
Yeah, well, I was very, very lucky in that for this book, Gecko Press, who are my publisher, came to me and said, would you like to do a book? Would you like to do a full-length book? So that's really lucky position to be in. But that happened because I had some smaller stories in a book that they had published called The Annual, which I had. I'll see if I can find that here. I've got that here. So this was some books that, the first one of these was published by Gecko Press, who are my publisher, and I had some short stories that were in there. So these were just 8-page stories, I think. This was in the first one, and this was in the second one. So the people who saw this had seen my comics in other places. So I had some other small comics that had been in a different book, a book about New Zealand comics that came out. And that had come out because the person who edited that had seen some comics of mine that were online. And you know, so it's kind of it's a step by step. And so for anybody, that is kind of that's kind of the answer of how those things happen. It's about small steps. So you make a thing, and you share it with your friends, and then you make a thing, and then your friends say, "Oh, that's really great," and you make it, and perhaps you get a good response to that. So you make a thing and you share it wider with family, or you put it online or Instagram or whatever, more people see it. And then someone said, oh, that was really cool. Do you want a little thing here? Do you want to be in the school magazine, the school newspaper, which I did when I was at school, right? I had a comic in that, or maybe someone's publishing a thing. And then someone else sees that and says, well, would you like to do something like this? So there are no kind of nobody overnight just kind of bangs on your door and says, make us a book. But those things go in small steps, and it was just the same for me for filmmaking. Really, I made little things, learning how to make it and making things for my friends. And I made a music video for a friend, and then somebody else saw that and said, "Oh, will you make me a music video?" And then their record company said, "Will you make me one?" And then I made a short film, and then I made longer films. So it's great to have bigger ambitions of what you'd like to do, but they just always happen in small steps, and find a thing that you love doing, have fun doing it. Like I was saying about drawing, concentrate on the bits improving that you want to improve for yourself, and enjoy making them with your friends or sharing them with your friends or your family. And you'll get feedback about what you're doing right, and hopefully you're enjoying it. And they just grow from there. So I think all of these kind of arty career kind of things, there's never an ad in the, there's never an ad that says wanted film director, wanted comic writer, artist. You start doing it and you grow your own thing from there.
Well, you've kind of already covered my last question, which was, what advice would you give Tamariki who are wanting to do what you do?
Great. Well, my advice is enjoy it, do the things you love, make stuff that you like and share it with your friends, make cool stuff and share it with people, tell them about it, and keep either keep doing the things you get good feedback on, or even if you don't get good feedback, keep doing the things that you love and you think are the good work. And you get good at working out what you think is good work and what you enjoyed making, and just keep doing it. And nobody can stop you. And soon you'll be an expert at doing it, and people will be coming to you going, oh my God, please do a bit of that for us. Show us how you drew that. Show us how you made that. Show us how you made that game, how you made that film. Just start become your own little expert, and then people will be begging you to help them too. And then one day someone will pay you for it, hopefully.
I think that's a wonderful advice. And I want to say thank you so much for talking to us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and that's the end of our Books Alive
session. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.